You've got exactly 12 minutes to leave or I'm calling Homeland Security. That's how I met Karen. Hair like a cotton candy explosion, heels sinking into dirt, and her mouth working faster than her brain. She was screeching at Mason, a 6'3" contractor with biceps the size of cinder blocks, while he calmly measured wood for a support beam. Mason didn't even blink. Instead, he looked over her head and asked me, "You want the ramp ADA grade or Marine grade?" I said Marine grade, of course. Karen's eyes twitched. "What kind of code is that? Is that a threat?" And before I could answer, she whipped out her phone, started filming Mason's truck, and screamed, "Illegal immigrant construction site. Somebody get ICE." The thing is, Mason was born in Iowa. But that wasn't even the funniest part, because standing on the porch was Len, a double amputee Air Force vet who immediately pulled out his phone and started recording her right back. Karen had no idea she just walked into a hornet's nest made of veterans, permits, and one seriously ticked-off former Army medic with a mission. The moment Karen stomped off yelling into her phone, I knew this wasn't over. She had the look of someone who thrived on HOA meeting minutes and garage sale power struggles. I didn't even know who she was until this morning. Apparently, she had once been HOA president before the board disbanded and got replaced by an outside management company. But that hadn't stopped her from continuing to act like she ran the neighborhood. She was the type who thought noise at 9:01 a.m. was a crime against humanity. She also had an unshakable belief that her porch cameras granted her executive authority over anything within a 3-block radius. Mason finished marking the support beam and walked over to me. "So, is this the local wildlife you warned me about?" I nodded and handed him a bottle of water. "Yep. You just met Karen. Welcome to the HOA jungle." He chuckled and went back to work like nothing happened. "That's Mason for you. Guy served 2 tours, survived a vehicle IED, and still managed to open his own contracting business. Calm under fire. And right now we were building something more important than just another house. We were turning my land, yes, my privately owned, zoned and approved land, into a transitional housing facility for disabled vet. The kind of place that gives people like Len a second chance to walk into society with dignity." The fact that Karen thought she could stop it with a shriek and a phone was almost adorable. Not even 10 minutes later, her Prius came back, this time with an official clipboard. I could see it from a mile away. She marched back over like she was leading a parade and started snapping photos of our truck tires and toolboxes. "This is all out of compliance," she said, her voice vibrating like a cheap car speaker. "Construction is only allowed between 10 and 4. You've got unauthorized noise, industrial equipment, and," she flipped through a sheet, "visible power cords." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You mean extension cords?" Karen didn't flinch. "Electrical terrorism," she hissed. "I've read articles." I tried not to laugh. I really did. But then she slapped the clipboard shut and said, "You'll be hearing from our legal team." Now, this is where the comedy turns into something more serious. Because Karen didn't know I'd spent the last 8 months locked in zoning battles, permit applications, and even a few late-night meetings with the state housing department. My land wasn't just legal, it had a special federal exemption for nonprofit veteran shelters. This meant the HOA, the city, and Karen herself couldn't do squat to stop me. But she didn't care about facts. She cared about her peace and quiet, as if we were building a rave center instead of a shelter for people who had served the country she supposedly cared so much about. Still, I kept my cool. Let her dig her own grave. Later that day, I checked the community Facebook page, my mistake, and saw Karen's newest post. It was a blurry zoomed-in photo of Mason holding a drill, captioned, "Suspicious men spotted building illegal structure. Probable cartel activity." The comments were a dumpster fire of conspiracy theories, recipes, and someone asking if she'd accidentally posted to her gardening group. I screenshotted everything for laughs, but also to document just in case this got worse. And believe me, I had a gut feeling this was just the first act. That night, Len came over to the site in his motorized chair with a six-pack and a Bluetooth speaker playing Johnny Cash. He parked right where Karen could see him from her window and raised a toast to the still unfinished frame. "She's gonna love it when we pour the foundation at sunrise," he joked. I laughed but told him to keep things cool. I didn't want this turning into a war zone. "Too late," Mason muttered as he carried in a stack of plywood. "She declared war the moment she called me an illegal." That part still bugged me. Not because it hurt Mason, he brushed it off, but because it revealed what kind of person Karen really was. The next morning, we were back at it by 7:30. I wasn't being petty. I had the permits and a schedule to stick to. The concrete mixer arrived around 8, and like clockwork, so did Karen. This time, she brought backup. 2 HOA board members who looked like they'd just rolled out of bed and were still halfway through brushing their teeth. They demanded to see paperwork. Mason handed them laminated copies of the federal exemptions and local approvals. One of them squinted, the other just nodded and muttered, "Looks legit." Karen snatched the papers and said, "Anyone can make these on Microsoft Paint." I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard I almost fell into the wheelbarrow. "You think we photoshopped a zoning permit?" She snapped, "I know my rights." I nodded. "And I know the sheriff personally." Karen's face fell just a bit at that. Because the truth was, I did know the sheriff. And the sheriff knew exactly what we were doing here. He'd even promised to stop by once the place was up and running. That's the thing about community, when you build something meaningful, people show up. Not for noise complaints or power plays, but for real impact. And the only person who couldn't see that yet was Karen. She'd picked the wrong people to yell at. And she was about to find out exactly how badly she'd underestimated us. The morning started with a thick manila envelope stuffed into my mailbox, hand-delivered and sealed with 3 pieces of tape, Karen's signature style. Inside were 9 printed pages of fabricated HOA infractions with a yellow sticky note on top that read, "Final warning before escalation." It was written in all caps with red ink, like she thought this was a hostage negotiation instead of a construction project. The list included violations like offensive hammering, excessive use of cement, and my personal favorite, failure to landscape while building. I didn't know whether to laugh or light the note on fire. Instead, I placed it on the breakroom fridge inside the temporary contractor trailer and titled it Karen's Manifesto. The crew thought it was hilarious. Mason added a fake citation of his own that read, "Too handsome for HOA standards." What wasn't funny was the fact that Karen had actually filed a formal noise complaint with the city. That meant we got a visit from a zoning inspector around 10 a.m., which she probably assumed would be the death blow. But the inspector, a middle-aged woman with work boots and a no-nonsense attitude, took one look at our paperwork, another look at the permit proudly posted on our fencing, and said, "You guys are good. Honestly, I wish more people filed this clean." When Karen popped out from behind her curtains to wave, the inspector just gave her a thumbs up and walked off. That small moment gave us all a good boost. We weren't just fighting back. We were winning quietly, efficiently, and by the book. That's the part that made Karen furious. I should have known she wouldn't stop there. Later that week, Mason showed up with a cease and desist order that someone had slipped under his truck's windshield wiper. It was printed on fancy legal-looking paper, signed with the name Neighborhood Preservation Enforcement Division. There was no such department in our city. The stamp was fake, the signature unreadable, and the letterhead borrowed from an old PDF template. We traced the IP address on the fake submission to Karen's old business printer. She'd run a scrapbooking business from home before retiring and redirecting her micromanaging energy toward neighborhood patrol. I knew then that she wasn't just being nosy. She was going to make this personal. The next day, I decided it was time to bring in some reinforcements. Not legal ones. Veteran ones. I called up my old friends from the service, Guys and gals who had served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and beyond, many of whom had gone through the exact kind of struggle this shelter was meant to solve. Within 2 days, I had 5 volunteers show up with tools, gloves, and more motivation than I'd seen in months. Len brought coffee and donuts for everyone and parked his chair at the property edge like a bouncer at a club. Mason cracked a grin when he saw the new additions. Looks like Karen's gonna need more clipboards. As we worked through the morning, a neighbor from down the road stopped by, curious about the build. When I explained it was a transitional housing shelter for disabled and struggling veterans, her eyes welled up and she handed me a folded check for $500 on the spot. She said her father had been a Marine and would have loved something like this. That single gesture told me everything I needed to know. For every Karen, there were 10 decent people rooting for us. She just happened to be the loudest. Karen didn't like being outnumbered. That weekend, she tried to stage her own community beautification day at the park across the street. She brought banners, cupcakes, and a couple of reluctant neighbors who clearly didn't know why they were there. She also brought a bullhorn. From across the road, she shouted about preserving tranquility, fighting illegal structures, and keeping our neighborhood free of disruptive elements. No one clapped. In fact, one of her volunteers slipped away during her speech and walked over to our site instead, asking if he could help build the roof frames. His name was Joe, a Korean War vet with a back brace and a mean swing with a nail gun. Karen noticed. She nearly choked on her gluten-free cupcake. The tipping point came when Len, who had stayed quiet through most of the drama, decided to post a short video clip online. It showed Karen yelling from her car window at 2 vets unloading lumber, accusing them of hooliganism. One of them calmly turned to the camera and said, "Ma'am, I lost my legs in service. I'm just trying to build something that matters." The clip went viral within hours. Reddit ate it up. So did veteran groups, TikTokers, and even a few local journalists. Karen's name wasn't in the video, but the comments were relentless. People wanted to know who she was, why she was trying to stop the shelter, and whether she'd ever served a day in her life. Suddenly, the story was no longer just about a neighborhood dispute. It was about a woman attempting to derail a mission designed to support the very people who had risked everything for their country. Karen, being Karen, doubled down. She posted a 4-paragraph rebuttal on the community page filled with passive-aggressive insults and claims that our site was funded by foreign interests and smelled like socialism. She ended it with, "I support our troops, but not when they ruin property values." The screenshot made its way to a major veterans group within minutes. They released a public statement supporting our build and condemning local efforts to sabotage it. The pressure mounted. We received a call from a city councilman who wanted to schedule a visit. Then a retired general reached out through a nonprofit we were connected with, offering both a donation and a livestream shout-out. Karen was losing grip, and she knew it. That's when the cones appeared. Bright orange construction cones were placed across the street, blocking delivery trucks from turning into our lot. No one admitted to putting them there, but Len's security camera caught Karen dragging them out from her garage and arranging them like a traffic controller on caffeine. Mason moved them to the sidewalk and zip-tied them to her mailbox in retaliation. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. Despite the chaos, our momentum didn't stop. With more volunteers, clearer support from officials, and the community now aware of Karen's antics, the work moved faster. The roof was up, plumbing underway, and we were on track for a soft launch within 6 weeks. But the best part? Karen's increasingly frantic attempts to regain control only made us look better. She couldn't stop the build. All she could do was scream louder. And no one was listening anymore. It was a Tuesday morning when Karen escalated things from chaotic to straight-up cartoonish. I was inside the partially finished shelter, going over supply lists with Mason, when we noticed 3 strangers in matching polo shirts and clipboards pacing around the property. They looked like they were trying very hard to appear official, complete with lanyards and one of those rolling measuring wheels. Len spotted them first and radioed in from his usual observation spot near the fence. 3 bozos at your 12. Uniforms scream, fake authority. I stepped outside and introduced myself. One of them, a thin guy with nervous energy and a mustache that looked drawn on, cleared his throat and said, "We're with the Neighborhood Compliance Commission." I paused. I didn't know that existed. He nodded seriously. It does now. The guy next to him, who looked like he just got off a used car lot, added, "We're conducting an emergency inspection due to repeated community concerns." I asked to see ID. They fumbled, mumbled, and handed me laminated cards with the logo of a gardening club and their first names written in Sharpie. It took everything in me not to laugh. Mason walked up, scanned the badges and said, "You 3 lost? Or just bored?" They tried to sound authoritative, asking about noise ordinances and material storage. I let them ramble, then told them we had full city and federal permits and had already passed inspection. One of them tried to quote a housing code section that didn't even exist. That's when I knew for certain. Karen had created her own task force. I asked Len to roll over with his phone. We recorded the whole encounter. The fake inspectors began to backpedal when I told them I'd be emailing the footage to the sheriff. The mustached one blurted, "You'll regret this," like he was in a bad action movie. Then they scurried off to Karen's house. Mason looked over at me and said, "Next time, can we have clowns with balloons? At least that'd be more original." We added the video to our growing archive labeled Karen Chronicles. It was ridiculous, yes, but also proof. She wasn't just annoying, she was actively impersonating officials to sabotage a veterans' housing build. And it was time to take that to someone who could do something about it. The next night, someone slashed Mason's tires. All 4. And they didn't stop there. Several bags of quick-dry cement had been opened and poured out near the framing, and one of the PVC pipe boxes had been ripped open and kicked into the dirt. It was vandalism, plain and simple. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I didn't have to. The security camera footage caught a blurry figure in a long floral robe, Karen's favorite, lurking near the property around 2:30 a.m. She'd pulled her hood up and used some kind of cloth to block her face, but her silhouette was unmistakable. Even her walk gave her away, that fast-forward shuffle like she was always late for a bake sale. Mason wanted to press charges. I told him to hold off, not because I wanted to let her off the hook, but because I had a better idea. Instead of shutting down or delaying, we did the exact opposite. We called every veteran volunteer we could and started running shifts around the clock. We installed temporary stadium lights so we could work at night. We played classic rock loud enough for the whole street to hear, cooked burgers on-site for anyone who showed up, and turned the shelter project into a 24-hour operation. Karen wanted us to stop, so we went into overdrive. By the end of the week, a solid portion of the community had swung to our side. Neighbors started dropping off snacks, water bottles, even tool donations. Someone offered their unused trailer for temporary storage, and a local grocery store started sending daily lunch trays with a little American flag sticker on top. The whole thing had become bigger than just construction. It was a movement. And Karen? She was losing her grip on everything she thought she controlled. Then came the mayor. Literally. We were hammering away when a black SUV pulled up and out stepped Mayor Langford, a retired Navy man himself. Word about the viral video and the shelter had reached his office. He wanted to see it for himself. We gave him the tour. He shook every veteran's hand, posed for photos, and told us that the city would formally recognize the project as a landmark nonprofit housing initiative. A small plaque would be installed when the ribbon-cutting ceremony happened. I was stunned. Karen was not. Because while the mayor was speaking on camera about the importance of supporting disabled veterans, Karen marched across the street in her robe and slippers, waving a binder full of evidence. She screamed about property value, noise, conspiracy theories, and how the shelter was an eyesore funded by shadow groups. The mayor turned toward her calmly and said, "Ma'am, you're interfering with a state-endorsed housing project. I recommend you go back inside." Karen gasped like she'd been slapped and hissed, "You'll all be sorry when I contact my lawyer." The reporter caught that too. It ended up in the evening news segment. Karen's meltdown became a punchline across several social media platforms that night. She was dubbed Operation HOA Karen, and her robe was memed into everything from military propaganda posters to pizza coupons. But the reality behind the humor was that she had tried to destroy a lifeline for people who needed it. That wasn't just annoying, that was vile. And thanks to her own actions, she had made herself the symbol of exactly what was wrong with certain HOA enforcers who cared more about control than community. With the mayor's support, things moved even faster. City inspectors helped streamline our final installations, and we received a surprise grant from a state veteran rehabilitation program. The funds would allow us to add 2 extra rooms and a small therapy garden out back. Karen, meanwhile, started isolating. Her once proud porch patrol routine was replaced with her peeking through blinds and avoiding eye contact. I'd almost feel sorry for her if she hadn't earned every ounce of her fall from grace. Still, I wasn't looking for revenge. I was building something that mattered. But I also knew there was one more card Karen would try to play. She hadn't filed a lawsuit yet. But that silence wouldn't last. And when it came, I'd be ready. Not with lawyers or counterclaims, but with every receipt, permit, camera clip, and community voice behind me. Let her bring her best shot. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about finishing what we started, no matter how loud the screeching from across the street got. The legal envelope came on a Friday, slid under my door like a passive-aggressive note from a roommate, except this one had the official HOA seal pressed into the corner and the return address of a downtown law firm that specialized in property dispute. Inside was a civil complaint demanding an immediate halt to construction on the grounds of unauthorized land use, community disruption, and visual pollution. It was signed by Karen, filed under the HOA's name, and scheduled for a hearing in 2 weeks. I almost laughed. She had really done it. She'd managed to convince the HOA board, what was left of it, anyway, to put their name and funds behind her crusade. Either that, or they just hadn't read the fine print and Karen bulldozed them into backing her warpath. Regardless, I now had a court date and a fat pile of ridiculous accusations to prepare for. Mason was furious. She slashed my tires, trashed our supplies, impersonated officials, and now she's suing us for existing? He offered to testify. So did Len. So did the mayor, the city inspector, and about a dozen volunteers. I wasn't worried about losing the case. Everything we were doing was by the book. We had documents, zoning approvals, exemption letters, and permits laminated like prized Pokémon card. But I knew this wasn't just about the legal battle. Karen was hoping to stall us, delay the project, drag it through red tape until we ran out of money or morale. What she didn't understand was that veterans don't break that easily. Especially when we know we're on the right side of the mission. When the court day arrived, I wore my best suit. Not for the judge. For the principal. Len wheeled into the courtroom in uniform dress blues, his medals glinting under the fluorescent lights. Mason sat behind me with a stack of evidence folders labeled in bold Sharpie. Karen's Madness, Volume 1 through 3. The courtroom was small, barely filled with more than a dozen people, but every seat on our side was packed with local supporters, many in hats, pins, or jackets showing their branch of service. Karen showed up with one board member and a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be doing anything else. The judge read through the complaint, frowned, then asked Karen's lawyer to present their argument. He stumbled through vague claims about noise levels and community disruption. Then Karen stood up, without being asked, and launched into a rant about lowered property values, scary people in uniform, and her belief that our shelter was going to attract unwanted elements. The judge let her talk for about 90 seconds before cutting her off. Then he looked over at me and said, "Mr. Rains, I understand you have documentation?" I handed over a binder that contained every city and federal document, inspection report, exemption code, and statement of community support we'd collected. I also submitted the video of Karen's fake inspection squad, the footage of her shouting at volunteers, and a few screenshots from her Facebook page where she accused us of running a covert military operation on civilian land. The judge flipped through the paperwork, took a deep breath, and looked directly at Karen. "Ma'am, what you're trying to stop is a fully permitted, federally exempt nonprofit project for disabled veterans. Not only does your HOA not have jurisdiction over this land, but your own actions are bordering on harassment. I'm dismissing this complaint with prejudice, and if I hear another word about a restraining order based on visual pollution, I'll hold this entire board in contempt." Karen looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Her lawyer quickly stood up and muttered, "Understood, Your Honor." As we exited the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Apparently, someone had tipped them off. The mayor had released a short statement of support that morning, and now local news wanted the full story. I kept it brief. "We're building something that saves lives. That's all that matters." Mason, on the other hand, gave them a quote they'd be using for months. "Karen picked a fight with the wrong veterans. Now she gets to watch us finish what we started." That sound bite made the evening news. With the legal drama behind us, we refocused. Construction surged forward. The roof went up. The drywall was in. Plumbing and electricity were inspected and cleared. The kitchen was installed by a team of volunteers who had served in logistics and knew how to make space efficient and veteran-friendly. The entire back area was transformed into a tranquil garden space, complete with benches, shade trees, and a fire pit. We added a therapy room, a small office for counseling sessions, and installed wide doorways to make every part of the building wheelchair accessible. Karen, meanwhile, grew quiet. Her porch sat empty. No more cones, no more shouting, no more clipboard visits. A few neighbors said she'd been complaining to anyone who'd listen about being silenced and betrayed by the board. Word spread that she had been asked to step down from any future involvement with the HOA, and that several board members had resigned after learning how far she'd taken things. No one wanted to be associated with her anymore. It was poetic. She had tried to rally the neighborhood and ended up isolating herself entirely. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled for 2 weeks after the court victory. We invited everyone: neighbors, officials, volunteers, veterans organizations. Even the news stations showed up. We had flags flying, food trucks lined along the edge of the property, and a small stage set up in front of the entrance. Len opened the ceremony with a speech that made more than a few people tear up. "This isn't just a building. It's a place where guys like me can breathe again. A place that says, you matter, even after the uniform comes off." The applause was overwhelming. One by one, people came up to speak. Some who had served, others who had family who did. A woman shared how her brother had taken his life after not finding proper care. She hugged me after her speech and whispered, "Thank you for giving others what he never had." I don't remember what I said when it was my turn. Something about service, community, and how you can't fight darkness with more darkness, you build light instead. Then Mason handed me a small brass plaque. It read, "Dedicated in honor of Sergeant Paul Rains, carry each other. My brother, my why." I didn't cry until I got home that night. From across the street, Karen stood behind her blinds, watching every moment. I knew she was there, and I hoped she saw it all. Not out of spite, but because I wanted her to understand that everything she tried to stop had become something bigger than her noise complaints and made-up citations. We'd built more than a shelter. We'd built a message. That when people come together, when they fight for the right cause, no amount of pettiness, power plays, or porch tyrants can stop it. The sun was just rising over the shelter when I heard the rumble of tires on gravel. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, expecting another delivery or maybe a volunteer showing up early. Instead, a convoy of trucks pulled in, each one wrapped in patriotic decals and flags. Mason jumped out of the lead vehicle with a grin stretching across his face. Behind him were Len, Joe, and half a dozen other vets from different branches. At first I thought maybe it was another media event or a surprise inspection, but then I noticed the trailer attached to the last truck. Draped in a black cloth and tied with a giant red bow, it looked like something out of a game show reveal. Mason motioned for everyone to gather. "You've done enough speeches," he said to me. "Now shut up and listen." With that, he yanked the cover off. Underneath was a brand new truck, fully customized with off-road tires, retractable steps, reinforced towing capacity, and even a hydraulic ramp built into the back. Painted across the hood was a simple phrase in white stenciled letters, "Built by those who served." The plate read Carenho. Everyone burst out laughing. I stood there, stunned and trying not to choke on my coffee. Len rolled forward and said, "You kept us moving when everyone else would have backed down. Now we're returning the favor." I didn't even know what to say. I'd been so focused on pushing forward that I hadn't paused to think about what we'd built, what it meant, and how many people it had reached. I walked over, placed a hand on the hood, and felt the weight of every argument, every nail driven into the frame of the shelter, every act of sabotage turned into progress. This wasn't just a truck. It was a thank you in steel and rubber. A symbol that we'd made it through the fire together and come out stronger. Of course, across the street, the blinds were twitching. Karen's silhouette was visible again, watching from her window like a villain in a neighborhood sitcom. The irony was too perfect. The woman who tried to stop a shelter had become a permanent spectator to its success. But the best part hadn't even come yet. A week after the ribbon cutting, I got a call from Len, and he sounded like a kid about to spill a prank. "You are not gonna believe this," he said. Apparently, Karen had sold her house, quietly, off-market, to an LLC. Rumor was, the embarrassment had gotten too big, and she couldn't go to the grocery store without getting side-eyed. But here's where fate threw a twist even Hollywood couldn't write. The land directly behind the property she moved into, just a short drive away, had been purchased by a group of vets who had volunteered with us, including Len. With their combined VA benefits and community support, they secured the land, built a few small homes, and turned it into a co-op housing spot for retired service members. Karen had gone from barking at veterans to being surrounded by them. The vets weren't mean about it, though. In fact, they went out of their way to be good neighbors. They invited her to every barbecue, sent cookies over at Christmas, offered to help carry her groceries. It was the friendliest siege you could imagine, and it drove her insane. She refused every invitation, slammed the door on every peace offering, and started filing noise complaints with the new HOA, who mostly ignored her. But karma wasn't done yet, because during one of the community events, a local news crew showed up to cover the success of the shelter and the Veterans Co-op. They interviewed Karen's next-door neighbor, a Vietnam vet named Hank, who had no idea she was the same Karen from the viral clip. When he found out, he just laughed and said, "Well, I guess she'll have to get used to freedom being loud." Meanwhile, the shelter continued to thrive. We had our first full house within 3 weeks. Every room was filled, each vet with their own story, their own path, and their own chance at rebuilding. We hired a counselor, partnered with a job training program, and even set up a shuttle service to get residents to appointments and interviews. The truck the vets gave me? It became the unofficial transport vehicle for everything from supply runs to emergency pickup. We even let the new arrivals sign the inside of the tailgate with paint markers, every name a reminder of why we did this in the first place. Every so often, I'd catch someone standing by the garden, watching the flag sway in the breeze, just quietly taking it in. No noise. No drama. Just peace. The kind you can't buy, only build. That's when I knew we'd created more than a shelter. We'd created a place of purpose, of pride. And nothing Karen, or anyone like her, could throw at us would ever change that. One afternoon, Len rolled up to me with a cheeky grin. "You know what I heard," he said. "Karen's trying to start a petition to ban flags taller than 6 feet. I raised an eyebrow. And," he chuckled, "I just installed a 20-foot one outside my house. Told her it was for patriotic balance." I couldn't help but laugh. "You're gonna give that woman high blood pressure." He smiled. "Then I consider my work done." The story of Karen's campaign against us didn't end with a dramatic arrest or fiery confrontation. It ended with her isolated, irrelevant, and outmaneuvered by the very people she thought she could push around. The community she tried to control now looked to us for leadership. The voices she tried to silence became louder, clearer, and more united. And the people she once viewed as a nuisance had become the backbone of something permanent. A year later, we added a second shelter on the other side of the county, modeled after the first. A nonprofit picked up our blueprint and began implementing it in neighboring states. We'd receive letters from families, pictures from former residents in their new homes or jobs, and every now and then, a handwritten thank you from someone we'd never even met. That's what this was all about. As I stood on the porch of the original shelter, looking out over the property with the sunset painting the sky in orange and gold, I thought back to that first day. Karen yelling, Mason measuring beams, Len recording it all like a watchdog in a wheelchair. And I smiled. Because even though Karen did everything she could to break us, she ended up doing the exact opposite. She gave us a cause, a challenge, and a chance to prove that when you build something with heart, nothing can tear it down. So yeah, maybe she thought she was protecting the neighborhood. But in the end, she just helped us redefine what the neighborhood really stood for. Service, resilience, and a whole lot of hammers.